Traveling around where the national parks are. Catherine teaching watercolor and Baby Archer. Watercolor with Catherine and Baby Archer.
Okay, let's see if they can hear us okay, huh? Yeah? All right, you gotta look at the cameras right there. That's where the camera is. You can look at yourself too. Hi guys, we're gonna do a video about brush techniques today. It's gonna be pretty simple. We're gonna get a close-up on the paper that I'm working on, and I'm gonna show you some different strokes and different ways to use your brush. Okay, so for this, baby, show them. I'll be using a number 12 round. All right, we're gonna be using number 12 round. Okay, show them. Show them the number 12 round. Okay, look down there. No? Okay, we're gonna look up there. You probably don't wanna hold it in your fist by the end like the baby is doing. Okay. We have two different brushes here. One for the baby, one for me. Maybe we need 3 different brushes. You can use it like a pencil, but you don't wanna always use it like a pencil. When we start the painting, for instance, we might wanna hold the brush a little farther back. This is like juggling. We have lots of brushes out now so that the baby, this gives you less control but more painterly strokes. As you move through the painting, kind of your average hold is going to be above the ferrule. The ferrule is this metal piece right here. Now, as you get into the very fine details, you can move your fingers up to the very tip. But I see a lot of beginners start working this way, holding the brush way too close to the bristles. When you hold the brush from back here, you're actually using your shoulder more to paint the brush stroke, as opposed to when you're up here, you're really using your elbow and your wrist, and that does not lend itself to a true painterly brush stroke. Okay, that wasn't working, Dad and baby. We're going on a bike ride now. Yeah, good. Back to watercolor. I just want to show you the basic brush stroke, which is a lot of pigment, a lot of water on the brush. I'm going to put the brush down slowly, drag it across the paper, and then pull it back up. The length of the stroke that you're going to use determines how much water and paint you're going to mix up, and whenever possible, you're not going to pick up the brush. If you do have to pick up the brush, you want to put it back down where you've ended the stroke. Here I'm going to show you just a squiggle, and I'm going to put the brush back down in some weird places around the brush mark to show you how it dries when you try to go back in and edit the line that you've already made. By the way, sorry about the little bit of camera wiggle that's going on. We're going to go try and find something that will hold the camera better for future videos for these close-ups. Because the previous stroke had already dried in places, trying to add back onto it created hard lines and a couple of weird blooms. So again, if you need to pick your brush up, put it back where you left off. Don't go back and try to fix your lines. Now I want to show you what you could do with the side of your brush. In this stroke, I'm using the side of the brush and moving it upwards and at an angle. This could be used for maybe grasses. You can tell that the brush is running out of paint, and the more it runs out of paint, the more grass-like it becomes. So that could be a good technique for working on some of our landscapes. Speaking of running out of paint, here I'm using a brush that is starved of paint. That's one way we can talk about the amount of paint that we're using. In this case, dragging a starved paintbrush across the paper can give it a nice textured look. You're picking up the texture of the paper. In this case, maybe you could be painting wood grain. Another way you might use your brush is to hold it on its side and just simply roll it. This brush has plenty of pigment and water on it, but it gives a really interesting texture on both sides, on the top and the bottom of the stroke. I've switched to a rougher paper here. This is an off-brand. I'm not saying you should get it, but it has more texture to it. The effect of this is even when you're using a lot of pigment and water, you'll see even more texture come through the brush stroke. That first stroke was just to show that one good brush can have so much variety to the line. Like you can use just the tip of it, get a nice thin line, and then get a much thicker line as you press harder. Above, I've shown I haven't gotten more paint on that first stroke, and you can see the roughness of the paper is coming through. And now I'm just placing a slightly different color right next to it. I'm painting another line, and you can see them bleeding together. That's an effect that I really like. It's not very good when you're trying to use the same colors, but if you use two different colors, that blending can actually be very preferable. Again, I'm just, with that purple line, looking at the different things that can happen just using that number 12 round brush. You can really get cool variety of types of line. Finally, I just want to point out that the entire time I've been showing you these strokes, they've been on dry paper. And when you start with wet paper, painting wet into wet, you get a whole different technique. So I've wet the paper down. It's got a little bit of violet in it just so you can see that the paper is wet. And now I'm painting that ultramarine blue on top of the wet ground, and you can see it has a completely different effect. Namely that the edges are not hard any longer, and instead we get a soft bleeding effect. And a lot of times in watercolor, you are going to want to be working wet into wet, and we'll have a whole different video on that.
Tune in with Catherine every week. Plein air mountains or a beautiful creek. Practice wet on wet or the dry brush technique. Watercolors with Catherine and Baby Archer. The RV is rolling where inspiration abounds. Getting it down on that 300-pound. Out in the wild where the stars are a million, aquamarine and red vermilion.